Buckle in, friends. You are not going to believe the scientific research that I found on fabric that's going to change the way you quilt. After you take in all of the fabric research that I share with you here in a minute in today's video, I'm then going to show you how I made my own healing quilt using thrifted clothes from the thrift store. Enough talking already. Come on. Hi friends, Tracy here from the Sewing Channel. It's true, I found some research that's going to blow your mind. I know it blew my mind. It is shocking. I have my computer in front of me to help me with this so that I can help you to understand what I now understand. And I also have my cheat sheet here. I have been taking notes and researching this for a few weeks now, and let's get right into it. In 2003, a doctor, Dr. Heidi Yellen, who has credentials a mile long, did a study on the frequency of fabrics. She measured the frequency in megahertz, and she did have I don't know if it was another doctor who it was, that helped her find the right machine to test the frequencies and gauge them. It's the same machinery that they test crops for farmers and such, I think. I can't remember right off the top of my head, but something like that. So what you need to know about the doctor here is that her premise was that all fabrics and everything, so to speak, has a frequency. It could be a higher vibe frequency or a lower vibe frequency. The higher vibe frequency is health to us. It gives us healing. The lower end of it is not good. It makes our body fight against it. You know, in some cases, they've even linked cancer and different things and a lot of skin irritations and all that to these synthetic materials that we put on our body and such. In a nutshell, lower frequency fabrics cause illness and higher frequency fabrics cause healing and health. Since her study, there's only been studies mainly on polyester fabrics, you know, all the plastics and all the chemicals that they put in fabric. There's never been a real study after her to follow up on this study, so that's important to note as well. I really do hope a scientist comes along and picks up where she left off, because unfortunately she's no longer with us. She has since passed away, I think a few years back now, so we can't even reach out to her and talk to her. Okay, so here's what you need to know. A healthy body is 100 frequency megahertz. When a body has illness, it registers at around 40 to 75 megahertz. That shows there's illness in the body. A deceased person, a dead person, they register anywhere from 5 to 15 megahertz. So now you have all that information. Now it's time to get into the good stuff. So say you have a piece of organic cotton made with nothing synthetic, and it's just pure cotton, not made with any chemicals at all. It's been registered at anywhere from 100 to 400 megahertz, which essentially is in tune with the human body. Now, regular cotton, where they've added chemicals and they've done whatever they do to it, I'm not even real sure, but it's not organic. That particular cotton, like the regular quilting cotton probably that we use from Joann's or that we buy, it's anywhere between 40 and 70. Now remember, organic cotton is around 100 to 400. So the 40 to 70, that's kind of working with an illness body. I don't know, but you know, take it for what it's worth. I'm not going to get into all the fabrics today, just the ones that we use mainly in quilting. Polyester, rayon, and silk. Now polyester is what's on the back of my pretty quilt here that I called it back in the day when I did this video. And it's that real soft minky, and sad to say, most minky is made out of polyester. Well, can I tell you, polyester, rayon, and silk, they have a 15 megahertz frequency, which is that of a dead person, which is sad to me because I love this quilt. But let's move on. Linen fabric, however, has a 5,000 megahertz frequency, which is crazy. It is actually a healing fabric and gives you high vibrations and promotes healing within your body and not inflammation, because they do say that polyester makes your body fight against the system, so to speak. all those plastics that they make the polyester with are shedding into our skin just constantly when it's next to our skin. That's why a lot of studies show that these are like forever chemicals, that they stay in your system and they're not good for you. They cause cancer, they cause inflammation and all the bad stuff. So, but I'm not going to get too far down that rabbit hole. So anyhow, linen is at 5,000 frequency. Now wool is also at 5,000 frequency. But when Heidi did this study, she actually put these fabrics together to see what happened. Something very interesting happened. When she took linen and wool and put them together, remember 5,000 frequency, 5,000 frequency, well, when she put those together, the field of frequency around these two fabrics collapsed. Yeah. So they cancel each other out. You cannot wear linen and wool together. Otherwise, they cancel each other out. And it's like a no-brainer. Just don't do it. But can I tell you, it gets even more interesting when it comes to wool and linen. In the Bible, God literally tells us in the Old Testament like 3 times not to wear wool and linen together. So I just find that so fascinating. I love it when things from the Bible end up truing up with science. It just, it's a good thing. And also in the Bible, God tells us to put linen on leprosy or sores or wounds of any kind because it accelerates the healing at such a fast rate that the body, it just aids in helping that. That's just the research that I found. Take it for what it's worth, but you look it up yourself if you don't trust it. So after I found out this research, you know what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, what in the world have I done? I've got all this fabric and I've made all these quilts. Well, a lot of them have really low frequency in it. There's no doubt about it. But I've never put linen and wool together, so that's good. Because I've never really quilted with linen. Being that I never quilted with linen before, you know what I did? I made myself a healing linen quilt. This quilt totally has a frequency of 5,000. There's no doubt about it. So we're going to get right into this because I made this healing quilt and I absolutely love it. It feels so good when I wrap myself up in this quilt. Now, the batting. Let's talk about batting real quick before I show you how I made this quilt. Batting is a little tricky because when I went to look up some batting, I found that a lot of the cotton batting that's out there does have, I believe it's like a polyester scrim on it or something like that. Or it has a little bit of polyester in it, like maybe even 4%. But you don't want that. You want 100% natural. And even if it says that it's 100% natural on the package, don't believe it. Look at where on the back where it tells you what is actually in it. You know that Wrap and Zap that you buy to make those bowl cozies? That is perfect batting for a high frequency healing quilt. It has nothing else in it because they make sure they don't put anything in it because it has to go in the microwave, which, is pretty good for us if we're just looking, for some really good batting that we know has no junk and chemicals in it. So you'll definitely want to check that out. If you're going to use wool batting, you would have to use an all cotton quilt or wool on the outside. So you wouldn't want to, put the linen and wool like we discussed earlier together. So there's that. I know it's a lot of information. Okay, a few notes before we get into the making of this quilt because I really need you to know a few things that I did not mention earlier because there's just not enough time. So this is like a real quick round robin. Internal sutures in surgery are made of a linen type thread. Important. Hospitals back in the day, they used to have linen bed sheets. They would wrap up the person who was sick in the linen bed sheet to help them get better quicker. That is true, and I do not think that they do that anymore. So I don't know. You let me know if your hospital does. Linen keeps gamma radiation away from the skin when you wear it out in the sun. It's like a shield. It's totally protection. And solar gamma radiation, I don't know, it's something from the sun. I looked it up. You can too if you really care. Linen is hypoallergenic. Research shows that sleeping on linen helps you to fall asleep faster. Linen also does not accumulate static, so there is no bounce needed. Now, I can attest to that because when I washed all of these fabrics prior to making this quilt, I had no static in my dryer, and it was amazing because, you know, a lot of that bounce has a wax on it that coats your fabric, which is not good for the skin either. So, also, let's see. Polyester does not reflect light at all, so there's no life in it, really. It only harms. Linen, however, reflects a ton of light. Okay, let's get on with showing you how I made this healing quilt. The first thing I did was get right online and buy myself a couple of flat sheets in linen, but I made sure that they were OEKO Tex approved. You definitely want to make sure that that label is on there, because that means it has no harmful chemicals in the making of it. Check the information box below. I will be sure to link everything that you see in today's video right in that information box, you know, except for the clothes that I thrifted. You'll have to go do that on your own. The next thing I did was head out to a few thrift stores. I went to quite a few. And I just searched through those racks and racks of clothes until I found all the linen that I could. And it didn't matter what size it was because I knew that I was going to cut it up. But unbeknownst to me, I ended up finding a few pieces that I'm going to end up wearing because they absolutely fit. Oh yeah, score! Now here are a few pieces of linen that I ended up thrifting that are not in this particular quilt, but I wanted to share with you that a lot of these pieces ended up being like $1.50 a shirt, and it was 100% linen, which was a total absolute score. I mean, some of it was 50% off. Some, I think the pink tags were like 99 cents, and you can just get great deals. So you just have to figure out what days to go and such wherever you live, you know, where your thrift stores are. But deals can be found, trust it. So this is how I processed all of the clothes that I brought home. I first I washed them and dried them just like I'm going to do with my quilt when it's already done. So I do use a dryer, so I definitely dried them so that they would already be pre-shrunk. And then I take them up to my cutting station and I cut on all of the seams like you see me doing here. And in my quilt that I did, that's in this video that I showed you earlier, I saved some of the pockets from the back, and I thought that just gave it a lot of, you know, flair, so to speak, on the quilt. It just looked really neat. And so I'm going to save one of the pockets on this one, and that's what I'm doing when you saw that at the beginning there when I was cutting it. I was trying to save the slit. Saving those tiny embellishments that are on the clothing to begin with, it makes for a really unique quilt in the end. Now linen has a very loose weave, so it's really hard to get a nice square block out of linen. So what you can do is use a lot of starch. I mean, drench it in starch prior to, you know, cutting it and sewing it together to make your block. That's going to make things a lot easier. I didn't want to use any interfacing on the back because I didn't want to introduce any glues or any other fabric that could have polyester in it. Now, starch can easily be washed out when you go to wash and dry your quilt after you're all done with it. So that's why, you know, I think starch is okay to use during that time because it's definitely going to wash out. Now, for reference, I used literally 6 shirts, 2 blazer type coats, 1 longer type skirt, 1 pair of pants, and 1 dress. And that's what made up this quilt. I first started off with 1 rectangular square piece and then just added another one to it, almost like a log cabin type design. And it's definitely a patchwork quilt, as you can see. And you can tell my pockets on there and some different embellishments that were on some of the shirts, which really gives it a ton of character. I even ended up with 2 big bags of leftovers of totally usable pieces of linen that I can add to yet another quilt too. The type of batting that I used in my healing quilt was Quilter's Dream Cotton. You can see it there on the left-hand side. I will definitely put a link below. Now, I did sandwich this quilt a little differently because of the shifty linen fabric. I didn't starch all of it because I ran out of starch, so that's why that is. So what I did was lay down my cotton batting first so that it stuck really good to the carpet. And then I went over with my quilt top and spread it out first to make sure that everything was going to fit. And then I took one of my pool noodles and rolled the quilt top back up. I pinned the end just like you normally would. You know, you've seen me do it a ton of times in all my other videos. I continued to take that pool noodle and roll up the rest of my quilt top evenly. Make sure that you evenly roll this up. You don't want one side to be, you know, more on one side of the pool noodle and not the other. Now, if you've never seen the pool noodle method, stay with me. This will make a ton of sense here when I finish rolling this quilt top up. It's important to note that once I roll it up to the very end, I do leave a flap still on the cotton batting there. And then I'll take my spray of 505 adhesive spray and I will put it toward that one end all the way down onto the cotton batting, and then take that, I don't know, what is it, like 12 inches or so of quilt top back onto that same area that I just pulled it up from. And I'm going to press with my hands really good, spreading that quilt top out onto that cotton batting. This is very important with this type of quilt. Well, it's kind of important with any quilt, but for this one in particular, because the weave is so shifty, you definitely want to make sure that everything is spread out. And be mindful of your seam lines too. If you feel like, you know, you see one seam pushed to one side more, you know, balance it out and push it the opposite way. Now you're just going to keep on going, unrolling it now back onto the cotton batting, and you're just going to take your time. That's how I did it, because if you try to rush it, you know, you're going to be wonky and you're not going to be happy with it in the end. Make sure that all of your seams, whichever way they're laying on the quilt top, lay that same way when you put the fabric adhesive down and then spread the quilt top onto that cotton batting. That'll make more sense when you get into it, because if you end up with a flip seam, you're going to be able to feel that when you go to machine quilt this particular quilt. Now, as you're rolling, you'll soon find out that you are going to be coming to the end of where the fabric quilt top is going to come off of that pool noodle. And then you'll just want to take your pins off and just set your pool noodle aside. And then you'll want to take the end of that quilt top and flip it back, just like you see me do there. And then you're going to, again, take your spray adhesive and just spray that entire area. And I do small increments. You don't want to do a real big area with the spray, because then other parts get stuck and then you have to unstick, and you know, it's just a pain. So just take the areas nice and small. And then you're just going to, you know, just keep spreading there as you get to the end. What I've realized with this type of quilt, being that it is linen and it's not as predictable as cotton, you are going to have some seams that will be offset a little bit. And you can probably see them if you look hard enough in my quilt, I'm sure of it. But this is what it should look like at this point. You just have the two pieces adhered together, your quilt top and your batting, and those are nice and secure. Now the next thing you're going to do is simply just take the one end that you just finished attaching together and just roll it up. You know, that's maybe, I don't know, 6 inches of a roll up there, and just make sure that it's nicely rolled up together, that nothing is askew and everything is, you know, good to go. Set that roll up aside, and then you're going to prepare your backing for your quilt. Now, I did order the twin sheet, I believe it was, in linen, 100% linen, OKEO approved and all that, and I pre-washed it and dried it, and then I ironed it. I found it was more affordable to buy the sheet than to buy the fabric, because they do sell linen fabric, you know. Next, you're going to take that nice pre-washed ironed sheet and lay it right side down onto your floor or table or whatever you're working on. And then you're going to grab that tube with your quilt top and batting, and you're going to lay the one edge down close to the other edge of that sheet, just like you see me do there. And then I spray, you know, all along the edge there in small increments again. But I first want to attach the first edge, which is the top of the quilt there, and that's what you see me doing, pushing that, you know, nice and flat there and spreading it with my hands, and that's going to help anchor that first part together. And then I lift back up the area that isn't sprayed yet, but it's still rolled. And I continue to just spray along small areas all the way down. And then I'll lift that back over and press with my hands, making sure that there is no ripples at all. Now, I love testing new things out, and that's what I did with this quilt. And by that, I mean I put the batting down first and stuck it to my carpet because I knew that those two would stick together. And it ended up working out better. I think if I would have tried it the other way, everything would have been way, way too shifty. And you can see here, the last piece I'm adding on is the backing. And since it's one whole piece, I have a better shot of that looking right than trying to, add the quilt top on crazily. So once you have all three pieces spray adhesive together, then it's time to quilt this quilt. Now, I did decide to do just a simple meander all over the entire quilt, and I didn't do big, huge meander. It was probably medium-ish because it wasn't like micro or tiny. So, but you can really tell here on this navy portion of the quilt how well that the quilting showed up. And also, oh, I almost forgot, I want to tell you, I used cotton thread. Oh yeah, and if you use cotton thread, I used Aurifil. Make sure you use an 80-12 needle, because usually I use a 90-14 with my Omni thread, which is polyester, but I switched to cotton for this quilt because, I was trying to make everything, breathable and nice and like natural, I guess. And really, I wish that somebody would come up with some more studies with the fabric frequency. I think that we could all glean a lot from these studies that they come out with, even just in our everyday health, I mean, knowing this now, I am rethinking a lot of things that I've done. And yeah, it includes quilting and the clothes that I wear as well, too, because now that I know linen is healing, I'm going to try to wear it as much as I can for sure. Next, it's time to square up all of those corners on your quilt. Now, when I squared mine up, I ended up being sure I didn't cut into the sides of the backing on this quilt because I ended up using those as the binding for around my quilt. Now, for the binding, after I squared everything up, I had a lot of that left over, so I made 3.5-inch wide strips, and then I sewed them all together, just like we do when we make our long binding. And then I folded it in half and gave that fold a really good crease by pressing it. It's important to note that for this quilt, I ended up coming in about 3/8 of an inch from that edge, and you can see right there, I'm showing you I'm in quite a bit, and it's about approximately 3/8 of an inch. I wanted to come in a little bit so that way it balanced out both the front and the back, when you looked at the binding. Now, it's important to note, I did not mention it earlier when I showed you my pieced blocks, but I did use a 2mm stitch length on this entire quilt, and even right here when I'm attaching the binding on the back of the quilt here, I am still using a 2mm stitch length. I know a lot of you have questions about that, and I want to make sure that I answered that for you ahead of time. But you can see here, I'm just coming up to the corner here. Now, in order to make this mitered corner properly, we need to make sure that we stop 3/8 of an inch before the end of the edge. And that's rule of thumb. Even if you're using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, then you'd stop a 1/4 inch, before the edge, or a 1/2 inch, then you would stop a 1/2 inch. So hopefully that helps you. So I'm stopping 3/8 of an inch before the edge of that edge, right? Or whatever. And then I'm going to twist my quilt so that it's angled so the point is at me, the corner is pointing at me, and then I'm going to sew right off of that corner. And you'll see here that you'll see an angled line there when I'm done. I'm going to show it to you here real quick. And there it is. And you can see there, yep, there it is. Sorry. I'm a little slow today. But yeah, that's what it should look like. Now, to make these mitered corners perfect, you're then going to take that tail while it's off of your machine out from underneath your needle, and you're going to pull it to the right there, folding it over so that now you have a straight line of the quilt top and the binding in front of you, all raw edge, right where I'm pointing right there. And then you're going to want to take your left hand and with your fingers pin down that corner area where the binding is folded over. And then you're going to want to take your right hand and lift that binding up over while still holding that down. And once you fold that entire area over right up to the edge, so the fold area is going to be right by the edge, nice and straight here in a second. And I'm going to pinch all those together and then follow through with that tail all along, keeping it still straight up against the, being raw edges are all together there. And then I'm going to give it a couple clips so that I don't mess that up because, it's inevitable I will if I don't clip it. And then I'm able to pivot my entire quilt so that I can keep on sewing. And I'm going to remove the clip and then put it right underneath my needle at 3/8 of an inch again. And then I'm going to give it a little back stitch here too, because I don't want stuff coming apart. So I'm going to sew a little back stitch and then I'm going to continue on at 3/8 of an inch all the way down that side area. I'm also going to give you a tip here in a second where you will not have bulk on your mitered corner. A lot of people don't pay attention to this, but you really need to if you really want to make your quilting next level. When you go to fold over this corner area, I'm going to show you right here, you're going to flip everything over, make sure that corner is nice and shoved up into that corner area, the batting and stuff in the quilt top. And then what you're going to want to do here is make sure that you fold the first part over in a way that in the end, you don't have those gaps right there facing the same way. So you can see here, I have one gap facing right there to the right, and the other one is facing the opposite way. And that way, that will leave you with, less bulk. Okay, so let's close up these tails here at the end of our binding. You're going to, of course, stop at the end there, and you're going to have a tail left over. And what you're going to want to do is lay it folded first, just like you see me doing here in the video, along one side and then folding it back onto itself. And then you're going to take the other side and you're going to fold that tail back onto itself. Now the trick here is to leave an 1/8 to a 1/4 inch gap in between those folds right there. Come in with your iron and give that a good memory crease because that'll make sense here in a second. Once you have those memory creases, lift it all up and out. And with a heat erasable pen, you're going to mark a plus and X, whatever you want to call it, probably a plus sign, right in the center where they crisscross, where that fold is. And then take the bulk of your quilt and clip it together so that way that gap is eaten up and we can work with these tails a lot better. Following what I'm doing here in the video, on that left side there, I pulled that tail out, opened it up, and laid it right side up. And then I took the tail from the right side and laid it wrong side up. So essentially, both tails are right side together. But make sure that you don't twist them. Ask me how I know. I've twisted them plenty of times. And then you want to pin them so that those plus signs are right on top of each other. And here I switched the pins around because I had them in the wrong spot. I needed to sew over top of that. And you're going to make a mark, a diagonal mark, just like you do when you make your binding. And then you're going to sew right along that line right there. And you can see here mine's all sewn up. And now I'm going to take my pins out. And I'm going to test this before I make any cuts, to get that bulk out of that seam allowance there. Make sure if it's too taut, you may need to let it out. If it's not tight enough, then you may need to put another row of stitching in. It's fine either way. Most of the time, 98% of the time, mine is spot on. And then you cut off that seam allowance there, 3/8 of an inch or however you did the rest of the binding. And press the seams open, refold that area right there, and then take it to your sewing machine and finish sewing down the rest of that binding onto the back of your quilt. And I'm going to show you here how I'm going to miter this up and show you that corner once again so that you don't have that bulk within the corner. And then you're just going to sew from the top of your quilt now, sewing that binding all the way down. Another tip I have for you is to take those fancy little 100% linen tags off your clothes and then actually attach them on to your quilt top. Like you can see right there, 100% linen. I just thought that gave it a really nice touch. I don't know. What do you think? And here's the quilt all washed up, and I just could not believe how snuggly it was right out of the dryer. I kid you not. I hope you make one. The first thing I want to show you about this quilt is that it is so fluid. I mean, it just feels like it's water or something. It's just like drapey, and I don't know. There's just something about it. I don't know if it's a mind thing, if it's because I know it's high frequency. I don't know. I love the way the back looks with all the meandering that I did with the quilting. And this linen is super soft. Just, it's so cuddly. Turn it this way for you. And this is after I've washed and dried it right here. I just love the way it turned out. It's high vibes over here, friends. How about you? Are you going to try your hand at a high frequency vibing quilt? Let me know in the comments, because you got to know what I know. All of my notes. Now I have my cute. I've been taking notes and been I'm going to give you on your own to decide whether or not to decide what you're going to do in your own quilting life. You need to learn first that what you need to know first is that Dr. Heidi's premise was that all frequency, in a nutshell, lower frequency fabrics cause illness. So that's what I found. But can I tell you that I know it's a lot of information. I'm going to share with you how I made after you hear me the research that I'm about to show you. No. Okay, I think I got everything out that I wanted to. Also, let's see. But the research is out there. It's high vibrancy. But the research is out there. It's high frequency. Oh yeah, I'm vibing over here. Until next time on the Sewing Channel, take care.